Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. October mornings in Nebraska have a particular quality. That bone-deep chill that seeps through your jacket no matter how many layers you wear. I'd been a property assessor for Douglas County for 3 years, and abandoned buildings were my specialty. Most were predictable. Crumbling farmhouses, defunct gas stations, the occasional failed restaurant. But the old Fairview Animal Hospital on Route 49 was different. Dr. Nathaniel Brooks had run the place until 2016, when the state yanked his license after what the newspapers called disturbing irregularities in animal care. Nobody would say exactly what happened, but farmers stopped bringing their livestock there months before it officially closed. That Tuesday started like any other assessment. I parked my Jeep Cherokee on the cracked asphalt lot, weeds pushing through every gap like skeletal fingers. The building squatted there, a single-story brick structure with faded blue trim and windows covered in plywood. My clipboard had the basics: 4,200 square feet, built in 1987, zoned commercial. What it didn't mention was the smell. Even from outside, there was this thick, sweet odor that made me breathe through my mouth. I grabbed my flashlight and camera, standard equipment for these jobs. The front door hung open about 6 inches, its lock mechanism completely torn out. Strange, considering the property had supposedly been secured by the bank. Inside, my flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a reception area frozen in time. Magazines from 2016 still fanned across a coffee table, and a calendar on the wall showed May of that year. A golden retriever puppy grinning eternally at nothing. But it was the reception desk that made me pause. Someone had arranged dozens of small animal collars in neat rows across its surface, each one labeled with a pet's name in shaky handwriting. Whiskers, Duke, Princess. Fresh handwriting, not faded. The ink looked maybe a week old. My job required documenting everything, so I snapped photos, trying to ignore how each collar was meticulously cleaned and polished. The hallway beyond reception stretched into darkness, lined with examination rooms on both sides. I checked the first 2, standard equipment covered in dust, nothing unusual except for that persistent smell getting stronger. It was in the 3rd room that I heard it. A low humming, almost like a lullaby, coming from somewhere deeper in the building. Not mechanical, definitely human. My assessment checklist suddenly seemed less important than finding out who else was in this supposedly abandoned clinic. The smart move would have been to leave right then, call the sheriff's department. But I'd been doing this job long enough to know squatters were usually just homeless folks seeking shelter. I decided to announce myself, maybe help whoever it was find proper resources. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the tile walls. "I'm with the county assessor's office. The building's not safe. I can help you find somewhere else to stay." The humming stopped immediately, replaced by a shuffling sound, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. Then a voice, thin and reedy, drifted from the back of the building. "They're sleeping. Please don't wake them. They need their rest after surgery." Every instinct told me to turn around, but I kept moving forward, following the hallway as it curved toward what the blueprint had marked as the surgical suite and kennel area. The door to the kennel room stood ajar, and the smell hit me like a physical wall. Decay mixed with industrial disinfectant, so strong my eyes watered. Through the gap, I could see rows of steel cages, most with their doors hanging open. But some were occupied, not by living animals. Inside were shapes. Bundles wrapped in surgical gauze and duct tape, roughly the size of cats or small dogs. Each cage had a water bowl filled to the brim and a name card taped to the bars. The flashlight beam caught movement in the corner. A man, maybe 60, wearing a filthy lab coat. He was hunched over one of the lower cages, carefully arranging what looked like kibble in a food dish next to one of those wrapped bundles. He turned toward me slowly, and I'll never forget that face. His eyes were bloodshot, pupils dilated, and his cheeks were sunken like he hadn't eaten properly in weeks. But it was his expression that made me take a step back. Pure joy, like a grandfather seeing his grandchildren. "Oh, wonderful. Are you the new veterinary assistant? Doctor?" Brooks said someone would come eventually. He stood up and I noticed dark stains covering his coat, some old and brown, others fresh and red. I've been maintaining the schedule perfectly. Feeding times, medication, exercise periods. Though they've been very tired lately. The surgery was hard on them. My hand found the doorframe for support as he began walking toward me, reaching into his coat pocket. "I need to show you the charts. Each one has specific dietary requirements." What he pulled out wasn't charts. It was a fistful of crumpled notebook pages covered in incomprehensible scrawls, dates that made no sense, medicine dosages for drugs I'd never heard of. He kept advancing, and I kept backing up, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not a vet assistant, I'm just here to assess the building. Maybe we should step outside and talk." His face changed then, the joy draining away like water from a broken cup. "No, no, no. You're one of them, aren't you? The ones who want to take my patients away. They said someone would come." Before I could respond, he lunged forward with surprising speed for someone who looked so frail. His fingers, yellowed and cracked, grabbed my wrist with desperate strength. "You can't have them. I promised Dr. Brooks I'd keep them safe until he came back." I yanked my arm free and stumbled backward into the hallway, but he followed, now shouting. 7 years. 7 years I've been here taking care of them. Feeding them, cleaning them, talking to them." He gestured wildly toward the kennel room. "They trust me. Buttons meows when I come in every morning. Mr. Fitzgerald wags his tail during bath time." The madness in his voice was complete. He genuinely believed those wrapped, rotting bundles were living animals. I ran. Not walked quickly, not hurried. Ran. My boots slipped on the grimy floor as I sprinted down that curving hallway, the beam of my flashlight swinging wildly. Behind me, his footsteps echoed, along with a horrible wailing. "Come back. They need their afternoon medications. You don't understand what happens when they miss their medications." I burst through an exam room, looking for another exit, and found myself in what must have been the surgery suite. On the operating table was another bundle, this one partially unwrapped. What I saw inside made me bite my tongue to keep from screaming. I won't describe it. I can't. But whatever Dr. Brooks had been doing to those animals before he lost his license, this man had been trying to continue it or reverse it, or God knows what. The surgery suite had a rear door, a fire exit with a push bar that gave way when I slammed into it. The alarm should have sounded, but the system was long dead. I tumbled out into the overgrown lot behind the building, brambles tearing at my clothes. The man appeared in the doorway behind me, silhouetted against the darkness inside, clutching one of those wrapped bundles to his chest like a baby. "Please," he called after me, his voice breaking. "Please don't tell them I'm here. They'll take my babies away. I'm all they have left." I didn't stop running until I reached my Jeep, fumbling with the keys, checking the mirrors to make sure he hadn't followed. As I peeled out of the lot, I caught a glimpse of him in my rearview mirror, still standing in that doorway, rocking that bundle in his arms. I called the sheriff's department from the road, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what I'd found. They sent units immediately. Apparently, they'd been looking for a man named Walter Hutchins, a former veterinary technician who'd worked for Dr. Brooks and disappeared when the clinic closed. They found him exactly where I'd left him, still in the kennel room, surrounded by 17 wrapped animal remains in various states of decay. The forensics team later confirmed they were all pets that had died during Brooks' experimental treatments back in 2016. Walter had been breaking in, stealing them from the freezer where they'd been stored as evidence, and caring for them as if they were alive. He's in a psychiatric facility now. They say he still asks about his animals every day, worried about who's feeding them. I quit my job 3 weeks later. Some buildings, I learned, shouldn't be assessed. They should just be burned to the ground. 3 years have passed since that night at Millbrook Middle School, and I still wake up screaming. I was 23 then, drifting through life with a communications degree that meant nothing and a hobby that meant everything. Urban exploration wasn't just something I did. It was who I was. Every abandoned building in a 50-mile radius knew my footsteps. My crew consisted of me, Jason, and Chloe, and we'd been breaking into forgotten places since high school. That August evening in 2016 started like any other expedition. We met at the old gas station on Highway 42, loaded up on energy drinks and beef jerky, checked our flashlights twice, and headed for the school that had been closed since 1998. The place had a reputation among explorers as being completely stripped and boring, but Jason had heard rumors about a sealed basement that nobody had managed to find. Millbrook Middle School sat on 12 acres of overgrown land, its red brick facade barely visible through the kudzu that had claimed most of the building. We parked behind the old gymnasium where the fence had collapsed years ago, killed the headlights, and waited for our eyes to adjust to the darkness. The main building loomed ahead, 3 stories of broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. Jason led the way with his tactical flashlight, picking through the tall grass and debris. Chloe followed close behind, her camera already clicking away at the shadowy architecture. I brought up the rear, scanning for any signs of security or other explorers. The side door we'd used before had been welded shut since our last visit, but we found a first-floor window where the plywood had rotted away. The smell hit us immediately, that familiar cocktail of mold, rust, and decay that every abandoned building wore like cologne. Inside, the hallways stretched out in perfect darkness, our flashlight beams cutting through dust particles that danced like tiny ghosts. Old student artwork still clung to some walls, their colors faded to various shades of brown and gray. We'd been through these halls before, photographed every classroom, every bathroom, even the old cafeteria where trays still sat stacked on rusted shelves. But tonight, we had a different goal. Jason pulled out his phone, showing us a blurry photo from some urbex forum. It showed what looked like a metal ring embedded in concrete, barely visible under years of grime. The poster claimed it was in the northwest corner of the building, near the old boiler room. We'd checked that area twice before and found nothing, but Jason insisted we'd been looking in the wrong spot. His theory was that renovations in the 80s had created a false wall, hiding the original maintenance access. The boiler room was exactly where we'd left it 6 months ago. Pipes hanging from the ceiling like metal intestines, the massive furnace sitting silent and cold. But this time Jason went straight to the back corner, past the furnace, to a section we'd always ignored. He knocked on the walls, listening for hollow spots while Chloe documented everything with her camera. I was ready to call it another dead end when Jason's knocking suddenly sounded different, emptier. He grinned at us, that wild look he got when he knew he was onto something, and started pulling at a section of drywall that had already begun to separate from the moisture. Behind it was older concrete, and there, covered in decades of dirt and rust, was the metal ring from the photo. My heart started racing as we cleared away the debris. This wasn't just any access panel. It was a proper trapdoor, about 3 feet square, sealed with an ancient padlock that had practically fused with rust. Jason produced a pair of bolt cutters from his backpack, he always came prepared, and went to work on the lock. It took 3 tries before the metal finally gave way with a sound like breaking bones. The 3 of us exchanged glances, that mixture of excitement and dread that comes right before you cross a line. You probably shouldn't. Chloe aimed her camera down as Jason and I grabbed the ring and pulled. The door resisted at first, decades of rust and grime fighting against us, then suddenly gave way with a horrible screech that echoed through the empty building. A wave of stale air rushed up from below, carrying a smell that made the rest of the building seem fresh by comparison. It was thick, sweet, and wrong in a way that made my stomach turn. Our flashlights revealed a narrow concrete shaft with a metal ladder bolted to one side, disappearing into absolute blackness about 15 feet down. "Holy shit," Chloe whispered, her camera clicking rapidly. "This isn't on any of the blueprints I found." She was our research expert, spending hours digging through city archives and old newspapers before each exploration. If she didn't know about this, nobody did. Jason was already swinging his legs over the edge, testing the ladder rungs with his foot. They groaned but held. "I'm going down," he announced, because of course he was. Jason never met a dangerous situation he didn't want to dive into head first. I grabbed his shoulder, told him to wait while I dropped a glow stick down the shaft. We watched it fall, the green light getting smaller until it hit bottom with a soft thud. The space below looked bigger than expected, extending beyond what our flashlights could reach. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I followed Jason down the ladder, the metal cold and slightly damp under my hands. Chloe came last, her camera strap wrapped tight around her wrist. The basement wasn't what any of us expected. Instead of a small maintenance room, we found ourselves in a tunnel that stretched out in both directions, the walls lined with pipes and electrical conduits that hadn't been updated since the 50s. Old janitorial equipment sat rusting along one wall. Mop buckets turned orange with oxidation, push brooms with bristles long rotted away, and shelves of cleaning supplies whose labels had faded to illegibility. But it was the air that bothered me most. It wasn't just stale, it had weight to it, pressing against my lungs with each breath. Jason was already heading left, following the tunnel as it curved away from the main building. Chloe stayed close to me, her camera flash illuminating unsettling details. Scratch marks on the concrete walls, a child's shoe lying in a puddle of black water, and strangest of all, what looked like makeshift barricades constructed from old desks and filing cabinets at irregular intervals along the tunnel. "Guys," Chloe's voice was barely above a whisper, "these barricades, they're all facing the same direction, like someone was trying to keep something from coming through." She was right. Every pile of furniture, every overturned shelf had been positioned to block progress from deeper in the tunnel system. We pushed past them carefully, the metal scraping against concrete with sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the confined space. The tunnel branched off several times, creating a maze of passages that couldn't possibly match the school's footprint above. Jason marked our path with chalk on the walls, but I was already getting turned around. Then Chloe grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. Her flashlight was fixed on a corner ahead, where the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. There, huddled against the far wall in a position that looked almost peaceful, if you didn't think too hard about it, was a body. It had been there a long time. The clothes had mostly rotted away, leaving just fragments of what might have been a janitor's uniform based on the name tag still somehow attached to a scrap of fabric. Eugene. The body itself was mostly skeleton, held together by dried ligaments and patches of mummified skin. But it was the position that made my throat close up. Eugene wasn't sprawled out like someone who died suddenly. He was curled up tight, knees to chest, one arm wrapped around a thick notebook that time had turned brown and brittle. The other hand was pressed against the wall where he'd scratched something into the concrete. Jason leaned in close with his flashlight while Chloe documented everything, her hand steady despite the situation. The scratches were hard to make out at first, just desperate gouges in the wall. But then the pattern became clear. Tally marks, dozens and dozens of them, grouped in fives, covering a section of wall about 3 feet wide. A calendar of days spent dying in the dark. Chloe carefully extracted the notebook from Eugene's grip, the pages crackling with each movement. Most of it was illegible, destroyed by moisture and time, but the later entries were still readable, written in increasingly shaky handwriting. "Day 1, she read aloud, her voice echoing strangely in the chamber. "Locked in by accident during summer maintenance. Door mechanism jammed. No one can hear me screaming." She flipped forward carefully. "Day 3, water pipes still work, thank God. Found some old crackers in the storage room. Phone dead. Why did I come down here alone?" Jason had found something else, a maintenance schedule clipboard hanging on the wall, dated July 1987. The school had been closed for summer break. No one would have been back for weeks. Chloe continued reading, her voice getting quieter with each entry. "Day 7, they're not coming. School doesn't reopen until September. I've tried everything. The door won't budge from this side. God help me. The entries became shorter, more desperate. Day 12. Heard something in the tunnels last night. Not alone down here. Wish I was. The final entries were almost unreadable, just fragments of thoughts scattered across water-damaged pages. They walk at night. Can hear them breathing. They know I'm here. God forgive me. The last coherent entry was dated day 18. No more food. Water tastes wrong. They're getting closer. I can hear them scratching. If anyone finds this, don't come down here after dark. The school sealed this place for a reason. After that, just scribbles and what might have been drawings of eyes. Hundreds of eyes. We stood there in silence, our flashlights creating a circle of light in the oppressive darkness. Everything made horrible sense now. The sealed trapdoor, the lack of any records about this tunnel system, the barricades Eugene had built in his desperation. Whatever had been down here with him, the school administration had decided it was easier to seal it away than deal with it. They'd locked Eugene in with it, either by accident or on purpose, and simply erased this place from history. Jason wanted to explore deeper into the tunnels, follow them to wherever they led, but Chloe and I voted him down. We'd found our story, solved the mystery of the sealed basement, and every instinct I had was screaming that Eugene had been right about one thing. We shouldn't be down here after dark. It was already past midnight. We made our way back through the tunnels, past the barricades that now seemed even more ominous, up the ladder that groaned with every step. When we finally emerged into the boiler room, I'd never been so happy to breathe moldy air. We didn't discuss it, but all three of us worked together to close the trap door, and Jason even produced a new padlock from his backpack. Some doors should stay sealed. We left through the same window we'd entered, and I've never gone back. The school was demolished 2 years later, the land sold to developers who built a strip mall. I wonder sometimes if they found the tunnels during construction, if they discovered whatever Eugene had been hiding from. I hope they had the sense to leave it buried under concrete and commerce. But on quiet nights, I still think about those final diary entries, about Eugene dying alone in the dark with something watching him, and I remember the one detail that haunts me most. When we'd first opened that trapdoor, the ladder rungs were damp. In a tunnel system that had been sealed for 30 years, they should have been bone dry. Rural Illinois has more abandoned properties than most people realize. I'd been documenting them for 3 years when Kevin and I found that farmhouse off County Road 2 I-21. We were both photographers. Well, I did weddings and family portraits to survive, but my real work was capturing these forgotten places before they disappeared completely. Kevin worked in graphic design during the week, but on weekends we'd load up his old Ford pickup with our camera gear and head out to find whatever the small towns had left behind. Schools with broken windows, barns collapsing into themselves, houses where families had just walked away one day and never returned. That Saturday in July started with perfect weather, clear skies, not too hot, the kind of day that made you want to drive with the windows down. We'd gotten a tip from an antique dealer in town about a farmhouse that had been empty since the early 90s. The property sat about 40 minutes outside the city limits, surrounded by cornfields that had grown wild and tall. The gravel driveway was barely visible anymore, overtaken by weeds and volunteer saplings. Kevin parked the truck near the rusted mailbox, and we grabbed our equipment. The house stood there like it was waiting for us. White paint peeling off in sheets, front porch sagging on one side, windows dark and empty except for tattered curtains that moved slightly in the breeze. The front door was already ajar, which wasn't unusual for these places. Animals, weather, other explorers. Plenty of reasons why doors end up open after decades of abandonment. Inside, the smell hit us immediately. Not death or decay, but something else. Old paper, mildew, and that particular scent houses get when they've been closed up too long. The living room still had all its furniture, covered in dust so thick it looked like gray snow. A floral couch faced a television that must have been top of the line in 1985. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, their faces obscured by grime and moisture damage. Kevin started shooting the wide angles while I focused on the details. A coffee mug still sitting on the side table, newspapers yellowed with age, a pair of reading glasses left on the arm of a recliner. The kitchen told a different story. Unlike the living room's preserved stillness, this space showed signs of hasty abandonment. Cabinets hung open, dishes scattered across the counters, a pot still on the stove with something dark and unidentifiable crusted inside. The refrigerator door was slightly open, thankfully empty except for condiment bottles whose labels had long since faded. On the kitchen table, we found the mail, dozens of unopened envelopes addressed to the Garrison family, the most recent postmarked November 1993. Bills, advertisements, what looked like birthday cards, all waiting for people who were never coming back to open them. Upstairs, the hallway stretched longer than seemed possible for a house this size. 4 doors, all closed except one at the end. The floorboards groaned under our weight, each step releasing small clouds of dust that danced in the light filtering through a broken window. The first bedroom we checked belonged to the parents. A queen bed with a quilt pulled back like someone had just gotten up. Dresser drawers partially open with clothes spilling out. Kevin found a wallet in one of the drawers. Driver's license showing a man named Robert Garrison, born 1952. The photo showed a heavy-set guy with kind eyes and a mustache that screamed early 90s. We put it back exactly where we found it. We were there to document, not to take. The child's bedroom was what really got to us. The door had stickers all over it. Dinosaurs, rocket ships, those puffy ones that were popular back then. Inside, everything was perfect. Too perfect. A single bed with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles sheets. Toys arranged on shelves like they were waiting for their owner to come back and play. School papers tacked to a corkboard showed careful handwriting practicing cursive letters. Timothy Garrison, age 8. Written at the top of each page. A calendar on the wall was still turned to November 1993, with a dentist appointment circled on the 15th that never got crossed off. But what made us both stop was the closet. Clothes hanging neatly by size, shoes lined up on the floor, and in the corner, a baseball glove with a ball still nestled inside, like someone had just finished a game of catch. Kevin and I exchanged glances, both feeling the weight of what we were seeing. This wasn't just abandonment, this was preservation. Someone had kept this room exactly as it was, like a shrine. We took our photos in silence, being extra careful not to disturb anything. The afternoon sun coming through the window made everything glow with this golden light that should have been beautiful, but instead made the whole scene feel wrong somehow. That's when Kevin noticed the basement door in the hallway. It had been painted over multiple times, the latest coat a sickly yellow that didn't match anything else in the house. The doorknob was different too, newer, with a deadbolt installed above it. Strange for an interior door. The basement stairs were solid, not the creaky death traps we usually encountered. Someone had reinforced them with metal brackets, and a handrail had been added along the wall. The basement itself was partially finished, concrete walls painted white, fluorescent lights that obviously didn't work anymore. It was divided into 2 sections. The first part looked like it had been used for storage, holiday decorations in labeled boxes, old furniture covered with sheets, the usual basement accumulation of life. But the back section was different. The concrete floor there looked newer, smoother, and someone had built a small room with drywall that didn't quite reach the ceiling. The door to this room was padlocked, but years of moisture had weakened the wood around the hasp. Kevin gave it a solid pull, and the whole mechanism came free from the rotting frame. Inside the room, the smell was different, earthier, with an undertone of something chemical. The space was maybe 8 by 10 feet, empty except for a wooden work table pushed against one wall. The table had dark stains on its surface, and scratch marks that looked deliberate, like someone had been counting days. But it was the floor that drew our attention. In the corner, several boards had been cut and fitted back together. not quite flush with the rest. They came up easily when Kevin pried at them with his pocket knife. Underneath was a shallow space, maybe 2 feet deep. At first, we thought it was just dirt and old rags down there. Then I saw the shoe, a small sneaker, the kind with lights in the heel that kids loved in the early 90s. It was wrapped in what had once been a blanket, now mostly rotted away. Neither of us wanted to unwrap it further, but we didn't have to. Parts of the blanket had deteriorated enough that we could see what was inside. Small bones, delicate and white against the dark fabric. A tiny hand, fingers curled like they were holding something precious. The air in that room suddenly felt too thick to breathe. Kevin stumbled backward, knocking into the table, and that's when we saw the underside, covered in photographs held up with yellowing tape. All of them showed the same boy from upstairs, Timothy, but these weren't family photos. These were taken from a distance, through windows, from behind trees. Someone had been watching him. In one photo, he was playing in a yard with other children. In another, walking to school with a backpack too big for his small frame. The last photo showed him getting into a car, smiling at whoever was driving. We left everything exactly as we found it and got out of that room fast. My legs felt like water as we climbed back up the stairs. The house that had seemed merely abandoned before now felt actively hostile, like it was pressing in on us from all sides. Every shadow could have been hiding something. Every creaking board sounded like footsteps. We didn't even pack our equipment properly, just grabbed what we could carry and headed for the door. But as we passed through the kitchen, Kevin grabbed my arm and pointed at the calendar hanging by the phone. November 1993, just like upstairs, but this one had different dates circled. The 8th through the 14th with vacation written across them. The 15th, the day of Timothy's dentist appointment, had been crossed out with red marker. Outside, the late afternoon sun had never felt so good on my face. We threw our gear in the truck and Kevin started the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. 3 tries, 4, the battery clicking weaker each time. That's when we heard it. A door slamming inside the house. Not the wind, not old wood settling. A deliberate slam. Then another. Kevin tried the engine again and it finally caught. We peeled out of there, gravel flying, neither of us looking back. At the main road, we pulled over and called 911 from Kevin's phone. The dispatcher kept us on the line for 45 minutes, taking down every detail. 2 sheriff's deputies met us back at the house, though we stayed in the truck while they went inside. They came out grim-faced, called for backup, and soon the place was crawling with police cars and crime scene tape. A detective interviewed us separately, then together, going over everything multiple times. They found more than just Timothy down there. 2 other children, they told us later, though they never released the names. The investigation made the national news for about a week. Robert Garrison had disappeared the same night as his son, leaving his wife Patricia to file the missing persons report. She'd maintained that story for 3 years before suddenly packing up and leaving town herself. The police tracked her down in Florida, living under her maiden name. She broke down during questioning and admitted she'd discovered what her husband had done. Instead of turning him in, she'd helped him cover it up, then spent 3 years in that house with him, pretending their son had been kidnapped. The night she left, she'd poisoned Robert's dinner and buried him in the cornfield behind the house. The authorities found his remains exactly where she said they'd be. Patricia got 25 to life. She never revealed who the other 2 children were or where Robert had taken them from. Kevin and I don't do urban exploration anymore. We tried a few times after that, but every empty room felt like it was hiding something terrible. Every basement door made us remember. He sells insurance now, has a family, normal life. I still do photography, but only happy occasions. Weddings, birthdays, new babies. Things that celebrate life instead of documenting death. Sometimes I dream about that house, about Timothy's room with everything waiting for him. I wake up thinking about how his mother must have stood in that doorway every day for 3 years, knowing what was under the basement floor, keeping his room perfect while the rest of the house fell apart around her. The detective told us later that she'd admitted to checking on the basement room regularly, making sure the boards stayed in place. She said she couldn't let Timothy be alone down there in the dark. That detail haunts me more than anything else. A mother's twisted love preserving both her son's room and his grave. Last Thursday changed everything for me. I'm a freelance photographer based in Michigan, and I'd been working on this series about forgotten industrial spaces for almost 6 months. You know how some people collect stamps or vintage records? Well, I collect images of places society left behind. Factories, warehouses, processing plants. There's something haunting about capturing the decay, the way nature slowly reclaims what humans abandon. I'd already documented 17 locations across the state, and I thought I'd seen it all. Old machinery covered in rust, graffiti-covered walls, broken windows letting in streams of dusty light. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found at the old Grandview meat processing facility on the edge of town. The building sat about 12 miles outside the city limits, surrounded by overgrown fields and a chain-link fence that had seen better days. I'd gotten a tip about it from another urban explorer on Instagram who said the place had been shut down since 2014 after some kind of financial scandal. Perfect for my project, I thought. I arrived around 2 p.m., parking my beat-up Subaru behind some trees so it wouldn't be visible from the road. The afternoon sun was harsh, casting long shadows across the crumbling parking lot. Weeds pushed through every crack in the asphalt, and the main entrance doors hung open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. The smell hit me first. Not rot exactly, but something stale and chemical, like old bleach mixed with rust. I adjusted my camera strap, checked my flashlight batteries, and stepped inside. The main processing floor stretched out before me, massive and empty except for the skeletal remains of conveyor systems and meat hooks dangling from tracks on the ceiling. My footsteps echoed in the silence, each sound bouncing off the walls and coming back distorted. I started shooting, capturing the peeling paint, the rust patterns that looked like dried blood in the afternoon light filtering through broken skylights. As I moved deeper into the facility, I noticed doors along the back wall, heavy metal ones with industrial latches. Cold storage, I figured. Most meatpacking plants had rooms like these for keeping products fresh. But something about these doors made me pause. They all had padlocks on them, which wasn't unusual for abandoned places, but these locks weren't old or rusted. They looked relatively new, maybe only a few years old at most. I tried the first 3 doors, all locked tight. The fourth one, though, had its padlock hanging open, the hasp pulled back like someone had been there recently. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, and the hinges groaned loud enough to make me jump. Inside, my flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a small room maybe 8 by 10 feet. The walls were concrete, and the temperature dropped at least 20 degrees from the main floor. But it wasn't the cold that made me stop breathing for a second. It was the scratches, deep gouges in the concrete walls, starting about 3 feet from the floor and going up to almost 6 feet. Not random marks. These were deliberate, desperate, like someone had tried to claw their way out. My flashlight beam trembled as I swept it across the walls, counting dozens, maybe hundreds of these marks, some with what looked like dried blood still embedded in the grooves. That's when I noticed the corner of the room. There was an old mattress, stained and moldy, pushed against the wall. Scattered around it were empty food cans, generic brands, the labels faded but still readable. Beans, soup, canned fruit. A plastic bucket sat nearby, and I don't need to tell you what that was probably used for. But the worst part, the thing that made my legs turn to jelly, was the chain. A heavy industrial chain, maybe 10 feet long, bolted directly into the concrete floor with a massive eye bolt. The other end had a shackle, the kind that locks around an ankle or wrist. It was open, thank God, but the metal was worn smooth in places, like it had been used. A lot. I backed out of that room so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. I should have left right then. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to get back to my car and never look back. But I didn't. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, maybe it was the photographer in me thinking this was important to document, but I kept going. I checked 2 more rooms. Both had the same setup: scratched walls, mattresses, empty food containers, and those horrible chains. In the second room, I found something else. A notebook, water-damaged and barely holding together, tucked under the mattress. Most of the pages were illegible, but I could make out a few entries. Dates from 2013, desperate notes about needing to get clean, promises to pay back money, and then nothing. The entries just stopped. I took photos of everything, my hands unsteady but determined. This wasn't just urban decay anymore. This was a crime scene. I was heading back toward the main floor when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the building. Not the random creaking of an old structure. These were definitely footsteps. I clicked off my flashlight immediately and pressed myself against the wall, trying to control my breathing. The steps got closer, then stopped. In the silence, I could hear my own heartbeat and something else, a low humming, like someone absent-mindedly humming a tune. It was coming from the direction of the loading dock area, maybe 50 feet away. I had 2 choices: try to sneak past whoever it was to get to the main entrance, or find another way out. The humming started moving again, and this time it was definitely coming my way. I made my decision and slipped through a side door into what looked like an old office area. The office was a maze of overturned desks and filing cabinets, everything covered in a thick layer of dust except for a clear path through the middle. Someone had been using this route regularly. I followed it, moving as quietly as possible, until I reached a window that overlooked the back parking area. It was painted shut, but I could see my car through the grimy glass, just a few hundred feet away. Behind me, I heard a door open and close. The humming had stopped. I grabbed a rusty letter opener from one of the desks and started working on the window frame, prying at the layers of old paint. Each scrape sounded impossibly loud in the silence. The window finally gave way with a crack that echoed through the room. I didn't wait to see if anyone heard it. I squeezed through the opening, scraping my arms on the frame, and dropped the 6 feet to the ground outside. I ran. Not the kind of dignified jog you might do for exercise, but a full-on sprint through the overgrown lot, thorns tearing at my jeans, my camera banging against my hip with each stride. I could hear shouting behind me now, angry voices, more than one person. I didn't look back. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, and threw myself into the driver's seat. The engine turned over on the first try, thank God, and I peeled out of there, gravel spraying behind me. In the rearview mirror, I saw 2 figures emerge from the building, but I was already hitting the main road, my speedometer climbing past 70 on the narrow country lane. I didn't slow down until I reached the highway, and even then, I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see someone following me. No one did. I drove straight to the police station downtown, my arms still bleeding from the window escape, my whole body shaking with adrenaline. The desk sergeant looked skeptical at first, another urban explorer with a wild story. But his expression changed when I showed him the photos on my camera. Within an hour, I was giving a formal statement to 2 detectives who seemed very interested in what I'd found. They asked me to email them all the photos and made me go through everything 3 times, taking notes the whole time. One of them, Detective Brennan, finally told me what I'd stumbled into. The building had been on their radar for a while, he said. They'd had reports of people going missing, mostly folks with addiction issues who owed money to the wrong people. The trafficking ring would grab them, lock them in those cold storage rooms, and keep them there until their families paid up or they worked off their debts. Not everyone survived the wait. The police raided the facility that same night. I found out later from Detective Brennan that they arrested 3 people who'd been using the place as some kind of twisted detention center. They were low-level muscle for a larger operation, apparently, keeping watch on the building and maintaining their sick setup. The detective said they found evidence of at least 12 people who'd been held there over the years. though they were still trying to track down what happened to all of them. Some had been released after paying their debts, others had been moved to different locations, and a few, well, they were still investigating. The notebook I'd photographed helped them identify one victim, a woman named Carla, who'd disappeared in 2013. Her family had been searching for her ever since. They never found her body, but at least now they had some answers. The detective thanked me for coming forward, said my photos were crucial evidence, but he also gave me a stern warning about trespassing in abandoned buildings. I could have been the next person chained in one of those rooms. It's been a week now, and I still can't sleep properly. Every time I close my eyes, I see those scratches on the walls. Imagine the desperation of the people who made them. I've put my urban exploration project on hold indefinitely. My friends in the photography community think I'm overreacting, but they didn't see what I saw. They didn't stand in those rooms and feel the weight of all that suffering. I keep thinking about the notebook, about Carla and the others who were kept there like animals. The detective called yesterday to let me know they'd made more arrests and found connections to similar operations in other states. He said my discovery might have saved lives, that they were able to shut down the ring before more people got hurt. I guess that's something. But I still wake up at night sometimes, thinking about that humming in the darkness, wondering what would have happened if I'd been just a little bit slower getting out that window. I know one thing for sure. I'll never look at abandoned buildings the same way again. Sometimes places are abandoned for a reason, and sometimes those reasons are still there, waiting in the dark. My cousin Jeremy showed up at my apartment 3 weeks before everything went wrong. His left arm in a sling and a nasty gash across his forehead that hadn't quite healed yet. He'd always been the adventurous type, the kind of guy who'd convince everyone to explore abandoned buildings or go cliff jumping at the quarry. But that day in early June 2013, he seemed different, quieter, more serious. I was folding laundry in my tiny studio apartment when he knocked, and the first thing he said when I opened the door wasn't hello or how have you been. He just stared at me with these hollow eyes and told me to stay away from Riverside Community Hospital, especially the old psychiatric wing on the 4th floor. I remember laughing at first, thinking he was being dramatic as usual. Jeremy and his college buddies had been breaking into abandoned places all semester. Old factories, shut down schools, empty office buildings. They'd post photos on Facebook of themselves posing with rusty equipment or standing in empty hallways, acting like they were ghost hunters or something. But Jeremy wasn't joking around this time. He sat on my couch, wincing as he adjusted his injured arm, and told me what happened when they went into that hospital 2 nights earlier. His friend Brandon had fallen straight through a rotted section of the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floors, dropping almost 20 feet onto a pile of old medical equipment. The paramedics said he was lucky to only have broken ribs and a punctured lung. Jeremy kept rubbing his injured shoulder while he talked, describing how they'd gotten in through a broken window in the basement. The place had been shut down since 2001, he said, after some big scandal involving patient abuse and fraudulent Medicare billing. Most of the building was exactly what you'd expect: peeling paint, broken windows, graffiti everywhere. But when they reached the psychiatric wing, things got weird. Some of the rooms still had power, which made no sense. The fluorescent lights flickered in random patterns, casting these sick green shadows on the walls. They found patient files scattered across the nurses' station, papers that should have been destroyed or archived years ago. Names, diagnoses, treatment notes, all just lying there like someone had been reading through them recently. The worst part, according to Jeremy, happened right before Brandon's accident. They were heading toward the stairwell when they heard the elevator ding from somewhere above them. Not just any mechanical noise, the actual arrival chime, clear as day. They all froze, listening to the cables groaning and shifting inside the shaft. Jeremy swore they could hear the elevator moving between floors, stopping and starting like it was picking up passengers. That's when Brandon decided to bolt for the stairs, moving too fast in the darkness. The wood gave way under his weight with this sickening crack, and suddenly he was gone, screaming all the way down. Jeremy and the others had to use their phones to find a way down to him, terrified the whole time that the elevator doors would open behind them. I should have listened to Jeremy. God knows I should have just nodded, promised to stay away, and actually meant it. But 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my friend Megan's car with her, our friend Anthony, and this new girl named Veronica who'd just moved to town. We were bored out of our minds on a Thursday night, and Anthony kept talking about how his older brother used to party in the abandoned hospital back in high school. Megan was all for it, saying she'd always wanted to see inside. I tried to tell them about Jeremy's warning, about Brandon's accident, but Anthony just laughed and said my cousin was probably exaggerating to keep the place to himself. Veronica backed him up, saying she'd explored tons of abandoned buildings back in Ohio and never had any problems. Before I knew it, we were parking behind the old loading dock, our headlights cutting through the overgrown weeds. The basement window Jeremy mentioned was still broken, though someone had cleared away most of the glass. We slipped inside one by one, our phone flashlights creating dancing shadows on the moldy walls. The smell hit me immediately. This mix of decay, old chemicals, and something else I couldn't identify. Kind of sweet but wrong, like fruit rotting inside a medicine cabinet. We made our way through the lower floors pretty quickly, taking photos of old wheelchairs and examining faded signs pointing to different departments. Radiology, cafeteria, administration, all dead and silent. But when we reached the 4th floor and saw the sign for the psychiatric wing, my whole body tensed up. The double doors were propped open with a wooden chair, and beyond them, I could see a faint greenish glow, just like Jeremy had described. Anthony pushed past me, excited by the discovery. Holy shit, there's actually power up here. He practically jogged through the doors with Megan right behind him. Veronica hesitated for a second, glancing at me, but then followed them in. I stood there for what felt like forever, remembering Jeremy's hollow eyes, before forcing myself to move forward. The psychiatric wing was different from the rest of the hospital. The walls were painted this pale yellow that looked diseased under the flickering fluorescence. Some lights worked, others didn't, creating pockets of absolute darkness between islands of that nauseating green illumination. The floor was covered in papers, just like Jeremy said. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Patient intake forms, medication logs, incident reports. I picked one up and saw it was dated from 1998, describing a patient who believed insects were living under her skin. The nurse's station sat in the middle of the wing like a fortress, its high counter forming a horseshoe shape. We spread out, exploring the area, our voices echoing strangely in the empty space. Megan found a drawer full of old keys, each one labeled with a room number. Anthony discovered a medicine cabinet that still had bottles inside, though the labels were too faded to read. Veronica was taking photos of everything, saying this was way cooler than any place she'd explored before. I kept checking behind us, unable to relax. The ward stretched out in 3 directions from the nurse's station. One hallway led to what looked like patient rooms, another to some kind of common area with overturned tables, and the third ended at a set of elevator doors. Those doors bothered me the most. They were cleaner than everything else, like someone had wiped them down recently. We'd been there maybe 20 minutes when Anthony found the room that changed everything. He'd wandered down the hallway with the patient rooms, pushing open doors and peering inside. Most were empty except for metal bed frames and torn mattresses. But then he called out, his voice different, higher, uncertain. We hurried over to find him standing in the doorway of room 413, his phone light illuminating the strangest thing I'd ever seen. The room was set up like someone was still living in it. The bed was made with clean sheets, a navy blue blanket tucked in at the corners. There was a pitcher of water on the nightstand, condensation beading on its surface like it had just been filled. 3 books sat stacked beside it, their spines uncracked. On the wall, someone had taped up dozens of photographs, all showing the same elderly woman at different ages, from childhood through what looked like her 80s. Before any of us could process what we were seeing, we heard it. The elevator chimed. Not a distant echo or our imagination. The clear electronic ding of an arriving elevator. We all turned toward the sound, watching those two clean doors at the end of the hallway. The up arrow above them glowed orange, impossibly bright in the gloom. For about 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then we heard the mechanical rumble of doors sliding open. No footsteps followed, no voices, just the soft hum of the elevator waiting. Megan grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. Anthony took a step backward, bumping into Veronica. The elevator chimed again. That patient, electronic sound that meant the doors were about to close. Then, from somewhere inside that open elevator came a sound that made my chest go tight. It was breathing. Slow, wet breathing, like someone with fluid in their lungs. We ran, not in any organized way, just pure animal panic. Anthony shoved past me, Veronica screamed, and Megan pulled me so hard I nearly fell. We crashed through the psychiatric wing doors, our footsteps thundering on the old linoleum. Behind us, I swear I heard that elevator chime again, followed by the rumble of movement between floors. We didn't take the stairs where Brandon had fallen. We found another stairwell near the administration wing and flew down them 3 at a time. Nobody spoke until we were outside, gasping in the parking lot beside Megan's car. Our hands shook as we piled in, and Megan fumbled with her keys for what seemed like hours. As we peeled out of that place, I looked back once and saw something that still makes me nauseous. On the 4th floor, in one of the psychiatric wing windows, a light turned on, then another, then another. Room by room, the windows lit up in sequence like someone was walking down the hall flipping switches. We never talked about going to the police. What would we even say? But I had to know more. I spent the next 2 days researching Riverside Community Hospital online, digging through old newspaper archives and public records. What I found made everything worse. The hospital's power had been officially disconnected in December 2002, over a decade ago. The city records showed it clearly, final termination of all utilities, including the backup generators. But there was more. In 1999, 2 years before the hospital closed, a patient named Eleanor Voss had died in room 413 of the psychiatric wing. She'd been admitted for severe dementia and passed away at age 84. The newspaper mentioned she'd been at Riverside for 30 years, making it her home. The investigation into her death revealed she'd been dead for 3 days before anyone found her. 3 days in that room, alone, while the staff went about their routines. The article included her photo, the same elderly woman whose pictures covered the wall of room 413. I couldn't let it go. Something about Eleanor Voss dying alone in that room, forgotten for days, kept gnawing at me. I convinced Jeremy to come with me to visit Brandon in the hospital. He was recovering, but still pretty banged up. When we told him what we'd found, his face went pale. Turns out when he'd fallen through the stairs, he'd landed in what used to be the hospital's records room. While waiting for the ambulance, barely conscious, he'd seen something in the scattered files around him. Death certificates, dozens of them, all from the psychiatric wing between 1995 and 2001. All listing natural causes or heart failure, but all discovered days after death. The place had been systematically neglecting patients for years before the Medicare scandal broke. Brandon had grabbed one of the certificates in his delirium. He still had it. Eleanor Voss wasn't alone. There were at least 40 others who died forgotten in that wing. 2 months later, I saw in the local paper that Riverside Community Hospital was being demolished. The city had accelerated the demolition after structural concerns were raised by anonymous tips. I suspect Jeremy might have made some calls. I drove by the day they took down the psychiatric wing, watching from across the street as the wrecking ball smashed through those yellow walls. When they hit the 4th floor, something strange happened. All the construction workers stepped back at once, and there was this long pause. Later, I heard from Anthony's brother, who knew one of the demolition crew, that they'd found room 413 exactly as we'd described it. Bed made, water pitcher full, photos on the wall. But the room was sealed from the inside, with the door frame welded shut. They had to cut through it. Inside, they found decades of water bills, electric bills, and grocery receipts, all made out to Eleanor Voss, all dated after her death. The demolition continued without any more incidents, and now there's a parking lot where the hospital used to be. Sometimes I drive by, but I never stop. I never even slow down. Four years have passed since that Thursday in November, and I still wake up at 3 a.m. sometimes, remembering the smell. Old wood, mildew, and something else. Something that shouldn't have been there. I was 34, running Brenner Construction out of a small Colorado town where everybody knew everybody. My crew and I had just scored the contract to renovate the abandoned Harrington estate into some fancy boutique hotel. The California investors paying for it had deep pockets and bigger dreams. They wanted the whole place gutted but the bones preserved. Typical rich people stuff. Maria, my wife, had made my favorite breakfast that morning. Scrambled eggs with green chili, toast cut diagonal the way our daughter Sophie liked it. Normal morning, normal day ahead. Or that's what I thought as I loaded my truck with sledgehammers and crowbars. The Harrington place sat on 12 acres of overgrown land, its Victorian towers piercing through a canopy of diseased elm trees. Nobody had lived there for at least 20 years, not since old man Harrington died, and his kids fought over the inheritance until lawyers ate up most of the estate's value. My crew that day was small but solid. Carlos, my foreman who'd been swinging hammers beside me for 6 years, and two newer guys, Mike and Terrence. We'd been tearing through the east wing for 3 days already, pulling down horsehair plaster and yanking copper pipes from the walls. Every room we cracked open released this thick, stale air that made your lungs burn. The kind of air that had been sitting still for decades, fermenting with mouse droppings and rotting insulation. Around 10 a.m., we reached the basement access in what used to be the kitchen pantry. The wooden stairs groaned under our boots, each step sending up clouds of gray dust. I led the way with my flashlight. The electrical had been cut years ago. The basement was exactly what you'd expect. Stone foundation, exposed joists overhead, cobwebs thick as cotton candy. We'd mapped out most of it during our initial walkthrough, but Carlos noticed something that morning we'd missed before. Behind a massive oak shelving unit on the north wall, there was a gap. Not just a crack from settling, but a deliberate space, like the shelves had been placed there to hide something. When we muscled the unit aside, the wood scraping against concrete sounded like fingernails on stone. Behind it was a wall that didn't match the rest. Newer concrete, maybe poured in the 90s based on the color and texture. Amateur work too, uneven, with trowel marks still visible. Mike knocked on it with his knuckles and we all heard it. Hollow. There was space behind there. Carlos and I exchanged glances. Renovation, you find all kinds of weird stuff. Hidden safes, old love letters, sometimes even Prohibition-era liquor stashes. But this felt different. The hair on my arm stood up, though I couldn't say why. We decided to open it up. Had to anyway if we were doing a full renovation. I grabbed the sledgehammer, told the guys to stand back, and took the first swing. The concrete crumbled easier than it should have. Whoever built this wall hadn't used rebar or proper mesh, just poured concrete like they were in a hurry. After 5 good swings, I'd opened a hole big enough to shine my flashlight through. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on something that made my throat close up. A metal cot, the kind you'd see in an army surplus store, with leather straps attached to the frame. The mattress was stained dark in places, fabric rotted through to expose rusted springs. But that wasn't the worst part. Bolted to the wall were chains, heavy ones ending in manacles sized for wrists and ankles. The metal was scratched and worn smooth in places like they'd been pulled against over and over. I stepped back and Carlos took a look. I heard him whisper a prayer in Spanish. We made the hole bigger, careful now, nobody talking. The room was maybe 8 by 10 feet, concrete floor and walls, no windows. Besides the cot and chains, there was a bucket in the corner. I won't describe what was in it. And a small wooden table. On the table sat 3 things that made everything real in a way I wasn't ready for. A hairbrush with long brown strands still tangled in the bristles, a stack of notebooks wrapped in plastic, and a Polaroid camera. Terrence reached for the notebooks, but I grabbed his wrist. "Don't touch anything," I said. "This is a crime scene." My voice came out steadier than I felt. Mike was already backing toward the stairs, saying he needed air. I didn't blame him. The smell coming from that room wasn't just mold and decay. It was something worse. Fear and suffering soaked into the concrete itself. I called 911 from the basement, my cell barely getting 1 bar of signal. Told them we'd found something during renovation. Possible crime scene. Send whoever handles this kind of thing. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asking questions I couldn't answer. Within 20 minutes, the place was swarming with cops, then detectives, then crime scene techs in white suits. They pushed us out of the house, took our statements separately. Detective Morrison, a woman with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much, asked me to walk her through everything. When I mentioned the notebooks, she got on her radio immediately. They needed someone who specialized in cold cases, she said. Those notebooks might be evidence from something that happened years ago. They kept us there for hours. Around 2 p.m., I saw them bring out the notebooks in evidence bags, handling them like they were made of glass. Carlos managed to overhear 2 techs talking, something about dates in the journals going back to 2008. That hit me hard. 2008 to now was 15 years. Someone had been in that room 15 years ago. The forensics team expanded their search, bringing in ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. They wouldn't tell us anything, but I saw Morrison's face when she came out of the basement after reading some of the journal entries. She looked sick, angry, and sad all at once. By evening, they'd sectioned off the entire property with yellow tape. Our renovation was officially on hold, indefinitely. The story broke on the local news that night. Maria and I watched from our couch, her hand gripping mine as the reporter stood in front of the Harrington estate. Shocking discovery at historic property, hidden room, potential connection to cold case. The words blurred together, but then they showed a photograph that made everything stop. A young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with long brown hair and a crooked smile. Ashley Donovan, missing since May 2008 from Ridgefield County, 2 counties over. Last seen leaving her job at a bookstore. Her car found abandoned on a rural road. No leads, case gone cold after 2 years. I remembered that hair, the same color as the strands in the brush we'd found. Maria turned off the TV and we just sat there in silence. Morrison called me the next morning. Could I come to the station? They had questions about the property's history, previous owners, any renovations I knew about. I spent 3 hours in a small interview room, going over every detail I could remember about the Harrington family. The old man had died in 2002, I told her. His son James inherited the place but moved to California almost immediately. The other son, Philip, had contested the will but lost. After that, the house just sat empty. But here's what I remembered that seemed to catch Morrison's attention. Philip Harrington had worked construction back in the day. Would have known how to pour concrete, build walls. He'd left town around 2010, supposedly for a job in Nevada. Nobody had heard from him since. Morrison thanked me and said they'd be in touch, but I could see it in her eyes. They were putting pieces together. 3 weeks later, they arrested Philip Harrington at a trailer park outside Reno. The news showed his mugshot, a man in his 50s with dead eyes and a face that had hardened into something unrecognizable from the guy I vaguely remembered. The evidence from Ashley's journals was damning. She'd documented everything, how he'd offered her a ride when her car broke down, the drugged coffee, waking up in chains, months of captivity, planned escapes that failed, the slow realization that no one was looking for her in that house. The entries stopped abruptly in September 2009. They found her remains buried under fresh concrete in another part of the basement. He'd moved her body when he sealed up the room. Philip confessed after they showed him the journals, said he'd kept her for 16 months before she got sick, claimed he'd been trying to help her, save her from something. The kind of twisted logic that makes you lose faith in humanity. The Harrington estate never became a boutique hotel. After the trial, where Philip got life without parole, the property owners decided to demolish the whole structure. I heard they donated the land to the county for a memorial garden. Ashley's family came to town for the dedication. Her mother thanked me for finding her daughter, for giving them closure after all those years. But closure is a funny word. I still wake up some nights, thinking about those 16 months. About how many times I'd driven past that house as a kid, maybe while she was in there. About all the abandoned places in America with their own hidden rooms. About the scratches on those chains. My company still does renovations, but now we're more thorough in our initial inspections. Carlos bought one of those thermal cameras that can detect temperature differences behind walls. Mike quit construction entirely, became an accountant. Can't blame him. Some things you can't unsee, can't unknow. But at least Ashley Donovan isn't a missing person anymore. She's a girl who loved mystery novels and vanilla lattes, who had a cat named Biscuit and parents who never stopped looking for her. She's remembered. That's all any of us can hope for in the end. It was the tail end of spring break, and boredom had settled in like the humidity, thick and unshakable. Back then, I lived in a small town just outside of Monroe, Louisiana. Nothing much ever happened there unless you counted tractor shows or church bake sales. I was 16, hanging around with my usual group, Eli, Derek, and Malik. We spent most afternoons riding our bikes down cracked back roads, pretending we were too cool to still live with our parents. That week, someone brought up the old juvenile detention center on Briar Hollow Road, and suddenly, we had a plan. Everyone in town had a different version of why the place shut down, but the common thread was that something bad happened in there. Real bad. The place had been abandoned since the early 90s, and kids whispered about staff beatings, disappearances, and lockdowns that went too far. Our parents always told us to stay away from it, said the building was unstable. That, of course, made it even more appealing. So one Friday afternoon, just before sunset, we stuffed flashlights into our backpacks, hopped on our bikes, and headed out. The building sat behind a sagging chain-link fence wrapped in weeds, the entrance half covered by plywood someone had tried and failed to nail shut. Inside, the air smelled like mildew and rust, thick with the kind of stillness that makes your ears ring. Graffiti covered most of the walls, some of it vulgar, some of it just names and dates. We found rusted bunk beds in rows, their mattresses long gone, just twisted metal frames and loose springs. The solitary cells were the worst, padded with cracked foam, door slots rusted shut. One of them had a metal chair bolted to the floor with leather restraints still dangling from the arms. Derek was the one who stuck his hand in it. There was a spot on the wall inside one of the padded cells, darker than the rest, shiny and strange. He pressed his palm against it like a joke, and when he pulled it back, his hand was covered in this thick, red sludge. Not paint, not blood, at least not like anything we'd seen before. It didn't smell metallic, it had this bitter chemical stink, like old meat and cleaning solution. He tried to laugh it off, wiped his hand on a discarded shirt in the corner, but his face was pale. We didn't stay much longer after that. We didn't talk much on the bike ride home. It was one of those silences that didn't feel awkward. It just felt heavy. Derek kept flexing his fingers like they were sore, but every time I asked if he was good, he just shrugged. We split off one by one as we got closer to our neighborhoods, and by the time I reached my driveway, the sun had dipped below the trees. The house looked normal. Porch light buzzing, my little sister's bike laid out across the front walk, but something in the air felt charged, like when a storm's about to hit, but there's not a cloud in sight. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of what we saw exactly, but because around 2 a.m. I caught something moving past my bedroom window. At first I thought it was just shadows, branches maybe, but then it came back. A figure. A man, maybe late 30s, tall and broad, wearing what looked like a faded orange jumpsuit. He was barefoot, but his footsteps were heavy, almost deliberate, like he was marching in place. He just kept pacing back and forth along the fence in our backyard. never looking up, never breaking stride. I ducked under the window and stayed down until sunrise. In the morning, I convinced myself I must have imagined it. Maybe it was a neighbor, or maybe I'd just been worked up from the detention center. I didn't mention it to my parents. They already thought I was spending too much time with the guys and not enough time studying. But when I went out to feed our dog, Baxter, I found him lying behind the shed. His body looked untouched. No wounds, no signs of a fight. But he was completely limp. His fur was dry, but there wasn't a drop of blood left in him. Not a single one. His eyes were wide open, and his tongue hung to the side like someone had just flicked a switch and shut him off. I yelled for my mom, and she came running out, still in her robe, and just froze. She didn't scream, didn't even touch him. She just stood there and said, "Who would do something like this?" I didn't have an answer. We wrapped him in a towel and buried him under the oak tree in the yard. My sister cried the whole time. I couldn't bring myself to say anything about what I'd seen the night before. It felt too insane, too disconnected. But part of me already knew. Whatever we stirred up in that place, it hadn't stayed behind. That same day, Eli texted me. His message was short. "You saw anything weird last night?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to say no, but I couldn't bring myself to lie. I just wrote back, "Yeah, did you?" He called instead of texting. Said he'd seen someone walking through the ditch behind his house around midnight. Same jumpsuit, same pacing. No sound, no light, just that silent, repetitive movement. Malik chimed in later that evening. Said something had knocked over their trash bins and left oily, reddish streaks up the side of their garage. None of us wanted to say it out loud, but we all felt the same thing. Whatever Derek touched, it didn't stay in that building. Derek stopped showing up at school the following week. His mom told the office he had the flu, but that didn't explain why I saw a for sale sign in their front yard 2 days later. Rumor was they were moving to stay with his uncle upstate. We tried texting him. No answer. When Malik rode by his house, he said the blinds were all closed, even in the middle of the day, and the family van hadn't moved. It was like they were trying to disappear without drawing attention, and honestly, I didn't blame them. Eventually, things got quiet again. No more figures, no more weird stains or dead animals. But something in our group broke after that. We didn't talk as much. We stopped biking around like before. Everyone sort of drifted. I think we were all scared to bring it up, to ask if anyone else still saw things at night, or if they had dreams about padded rooms and empty restraints swaying without wind. I still don't know what that red stuff was, or why it clung to Derek the way it did. But I do know this: whatever that place was meant to contain, it didn't like being disturbed. It's been a few years now. I drive past Briar Hollow sometimes when I go visit my dad, and the detention center's still standing. Half sunken into the overgrowth, windows smashed out, doors hanging crooked. But I never stop. I don't even slow down. And if you're ever tempted to check it out for yourself, just don't touch anything. Not the walls, not the restraints, not even the floor. Some things rot quietly, others remember.